Double Classic and Double Arena. In 2007, I was still doing the odd gig here and there and ambling my way through my album. Most of the gigs I was doing were solo acoustic shows, but whenever I could involve the lads, then I would. I got an invitation from Pete Wiley to go and perform at one of his classic nights at the Zanzibar in Liverpool. The format for Classic was pretty loose, but artists had to play a classic song of their own and a cover version of another classic. When he sent me the text invite, I told him I'd play The Power of Love and the Only Ones classic, Another Girl, Another Planet. He replied saying, "Great, I love Huey Lewis and heroin." I went to his house, Disgracelands, the day before to rehearse and draw up a set list of cover versions. We were a broad church with everything from Zeppelin's Rock and Roll to an acoustic version of Our Friends Electric, with a few of his and a few of mine slotted between the covers, along with a liberal sprinkling of banter. When I played The Power of Love, the packed crowds were all singing along, and for me it felt like a nod of approval from my own people. The outro was rowdy, with Pete echoing in with his best Neil Young licks. We did 2 one-hour sets that culminated in a rousing version of Pete's Scouse anthem, Heart as Big as Liverpool, with the whole audience on backing vocals. It was like being at the match. My neighbour, Martin Egan, had got himself a job working at Real Madrid TV and invited Ed Smart and myself over for a game. For some time I'd fancied doing a bit of a road trip and convinced Ed he did too. The plan was to fly to Madrid and watch them play in the Bernabeu, and then watch them play away the following week at Bilbao. In between the games we would travel to Santiago de Compostela, La Coruña, Gijón, Oviedo and Santander before arriving in Bilbao. I could go into huge detail about this trip, but let's just say it was so good we've done a similar tour every year since. It's a bit like being on tour but without the gigs to interrupt the sightseeing and drinking. I did take a guitar with me and we recorded a little bit of video as we drove through Los Picos de Europas. I could not turn down such an epic backdrop, so sat on a rock and strummed away while Ed filmed it. The boys in my band had started a new covers band called Stone Pony. Evo Diablo had dissolved when Laura left, and CJ and Damien O'Brien had joined Noel, Niall and Dan in a new lineup. Every time I went to see them play, I'd get up and do a couple of tunes and often ended up playing half of the covers with them. I'd never played in a covers band before, so to be able to stand at the back and noodle away was great fun, and playing with the guys was always a pleasure. Stone Pony were invited to Ireland for a few gigs back home, and I decided to tag along. 3 gigs were booked over the weekend, and when we arrived the weather was glorious. The guys played their covers set, and as usual I did 3 or 4 numbers with them, but spent most of my time chatting to newly found Irish drinking pals. We played 1 gig in Tully and headed to Kenmare to visit the Sweeney family farm. We were spoilt with famous Irish hospitality, and Niall and Dan's mum, Evelyn, plied me with copious amounts of tea. The water for the house came from a borehole in the garden, and the tea was outstanding. I'm a real tea head, and I must have sank a couple of litres of it in the few hours we were there because me cup never drained. The boys played at a pub in town, and we retired back to the farm for drinks until the early hours. When you have great company, it's hard to go to bed, and that was why Mr. Sweeney Sr. and I were opening a bottle of Sambuca at 8 in the morning. After breakfast, we set up all the gear in front of the house. Other musicians and friends arrived, and we ended up having a huge jam. There was no worry about the noise either because the nearest farm was a couple of miles away. It made a change for me to play outdoors without getting drenched. Within the month we'd do a gig at the East Barnet Festival to a crowd decimated by rain. If the weather would have been good, there'd have been over 1,000 people in the park, but the piss and rain meant we played to about 20 people, and I knew every single one of them. If you should ever come and see me play outdoors, then bring a brolly. I'm a jinx, regardless of the time of year. When I returned from Ireland, I began mixing some of the finished tracks. I did a trade with Aid. I did some sparky work for him and he'd mix my album. Aid got some new sockets and power to his shed, and I got a Grammy-winning engineer to mix my album in exchange. I think I got the best end of the trade. I spent a few days of that summer driving my daughter Lois around various universities, including Liverpool. I was pushing her to go to Liverpool because I knew the city, I knew it was party central, and I knew she'd have a great time. She hasn't come back since. She loves it, and I love that she loves it. Martin O'Shea, manager of my pals The Real People, contacted me about contributing to a charity record called the Number One Project. Apparently, Liverpool artists have achieved more number one records than any other city in the UK. Hardly surprising given the head start that the Beatles gave us. The idea was to have current Liverpool bands record all the chart toppers and release it on an album. Connie Lush, a real rock and blues singer, had chosen The Power of Love, and I was asked to provide an acoustic guitar track. I recorded it in my studio and emailed it to Martin, and Connie recorded her vocal over it. It was bizarre to have a record release performing with a woman who I didn't know and had never met. Connie did a great job, and it's judged to be one of the better tracks on the album. My favourite song was Thea Gilmore's version of Dead or Alive's You Spin Me Round. Check it out, it's a great version and illustrates what a great song it is. Pete Wiley's classic had been going down great guns, and he asked me back again to perform in the last one, the Christmas classic. We had Paul Zanos and Dave Owen join us on drums and guitar, and Pete's daughter Mersey did backing vocals. It was another great night and probably got a better reception than the first one. What a great way to end the year. Christmas was hardly over before I got a call from Pete with another invitation. Liverpool was entering the year as the 2008 capital of culture. Money had been pumped into the city and several new buildings had cropped up, one of which was the new Echo Arena. It was about time that Liverpool had a venue to host the biggest and best shows. It was just a shame it arrived about 20 years too late for me. The arena would open with a show to celebrate the city's new status, and Pete had been invited to perform. When he rang me, the conversation went something like, "Do you fancy playing guitar on Art as Big as Liverpool with me and the Liverpool Philharmonic?" What do you think? I asked Pete recently why he asked me to do the show. He said that in his opinion, Frankie were one of Liverpool's most successful bands, and he felt it was important to have some representation at this celebration of Liverpool's history. I thought my days of playing in front of huge crowds were over, so I was delighted to be asked. We rehearsed at Pete's house the day before the show. The lineup was drums, bass and 3 guitars, with 4 of us backing Pete in the vocal department. Mersey Wiley and Alicia Bonagora complimented the 3 men, and it sounded great rehearsing in his living room, so we were excited to hear it in the arena, especially with the orchestra playing along. There was a huge bill for the show with some very diverse acts. It was a stellar lineup of Liverpool musical talent, with the Bunnymen, Shaq, The Farm and Wiley to name a few. Ringo Starr would close the show. The Echo Arena was brand new, and entering it for the first time you couldn't help but be impressed. Pete had always insisted that Liverpool didn't want an arena because Simply Reds would turn up to play, but as they'd split up it was now safe. A huge 6-tier scaffold dominated the rear of the stage, with a scrim covering the front to enable use as a screen for the many projections that would accompany the show. We spent ages hanging about and mingling with the other artists until our time for soundcheck. We were playing Heart as Big as Liverpool with the orchestra starting and the band kicking in after the lush intro. Sounds easy, doesn't it? There were communication problems between Paul Zanos and the orchestra. He couldn't see conductor Vasily Petrenko, and he couldn't hear the click that would count him in. The first run-through was aborted because Paul missed the intro through no fault of his own. If he missed it on the night, there was no way the orchestra would wait. They would be off and running like a false start at Aintree and be halfway through before noticing we weren't with them. The glitches were eventually sorted, much to everyone's relief. Ringo turned up right on cue for his soundcheck. No hanging about for the Beatle. As he walked from his dressing room to the stage, there were security guys walking in front of him, clearing the way. You would have thought a president or a pope was in the building. I'd never seen a Beatle in the wild before, and I couldn't believe how little and skinny he was. He looked more like Steptoe than Ringo. Nobody was asked. Scousers are not impressed, least of all by one of their own. Ringo wanted all the other artists to join him on stage for the finale, where he would lead the assembled ranks and the audience in a version of Give Peace a Chance. This walk-on part would have to be rehearsed also, so on Ringo's cue, the bands that were there walked on stage and lined up behind him. I ended up standing right next to Ringo, and photographer Robert Cook snapped a souvenir shot for me. Okay, it's only Ringo, but at least it was a Beatle. Liverpool's famous and not so famous filled most of the seats on the floor of the arena, and it wasn't difficult to spot celebrity faces. There was everyone from the Lord Mayor to Ken Dodd. There are people in Liverpool who think that should be one person. Showtime arrived and I couldn't wait to get on. The on-stage sound was excellent and I knew we were going to come across well. Pete started singing and his demeanour and delivery seemed quite sombre, but he went through the gears. Sombre to optimistic to beseeching in 32 bars. By the end, the members of the crowd who knew the words to the anthemic chorus were all singing along. The four-part harmony sounded fantastic. We took our bow and returned to the stage 20 minutes later to join Ringo. The show closed in a shower of streamers and confetti, with the audience all on their feet cheering. It was a great celebration of the city and very fitting that it should be the inaugural show. I was hardly over the buzz of playing the first show before I was back in the building the following weekend for another show. The Number One's project show was another Scouse extravaganza. I was going to accompany Connie Lush for their performance of The Power of Love. I'd briefly said hello to her the week before because she'd appeared at the opening show too. We did an interview the day before, so we had a little run through of the song beforehand. I couldn't believe the power of Connie's voice. She makes a big sound for such a little lady. When we performed for TV, she was sitting next to me on the arm of the sofa and nearly blew me hat off. Connie and I did a little rehearsal in the dressing room and took to the stage. Connie belted it out of the park, although she cocked up the arrangement and missed out on hitting her big note. As much as I'd enjoyed performing with Pete, I enjoyed this one more because I was playing one of my own band's songs. The guitar part didn't require too much attention, so I had more opportunity to survey the crowd and get lost in the moment. I'd spent the previous years playing to handfuls of people in various venues around the country, and to play to a packed arena containing the best part of 10,000 was awesome and unforgettable. What a great way to start the year.